Hey YouTubers, how you doing? This is Pipe Radio again, and I'm making another video, kind of as a continuation of a video I made about multidimensional beings. Obviously, it's a very interesting subject, and there's a lot to it. There's a lot to the idea of the different dimensionalities, our place in it, and what it means for the state of our existence. I talked about before, just really short, I talked about before how I believe that we existed, or maybe I didn't say this in the last video, but I believe that we exist on all of the dimensions at the same time, although what we understand to be our physical reality is limited to a certain amount of the dimensions, and then we are actually existing on the higher dimensions by extension of another part of us, or something that we are a part of. I talked about how I thought that our brain was a specifically designed fifth dimensional organ. I didn't mention in the video that I felt that obviously our brain and our mind rules our body, but in particular, it is meant to be the most important part of our body, and I'll get into that in a later video, but right now I just wanted to set that as a precedent. Also, I wanted to just mention that I believe that the existences, especially in regards to organisms, but in general, I believe that each lower dimension is subject to the dimension above it. So in other words, you can almost consider it like a hierarchy in dimensions. And so you would have a situation where really, we got it labeled some of the lower physical dimensions in space-time as first, second, third dimension, which is length, width, and height, and then time is a pseudo fourth dimension. When really we should, especially according to M theory, we should be starting from what we call the 11th dimension, which really should be the first dimension, and then each dimension below it is based off of the last dimension. But that gets into the idea of perspective, and perspective gets into something a little bit outside than what they can prove mathematically. It gets into certain types of theories and stuff. But anyway, just to keep it simple, that's my opinion. That's my idea about the order of dimensions and how they come about and what we consider a physical existence. Also, I wanted to mention that, like, what we see as a physical existence in terms of size, like as we go further out, we notice that space is very vast, stars are huge, there's galaxies and all of these huge objects, and us in relation to our molecules and cells are very large. And then our cells and molecules in relation to the atoms and subatomic particles that make them up is very large. And then the subatomic particles in relation to the frequencies on which they vibrate on, it is very large comparatively. And so the idea is but okay, let me make sure I say this right. Even though the case is that it seems like the very large is very expansive and awe-inspiring, the truth of the matter is that it seems to me that the higher the dimension, the actual smaller space that it encompasses in terms of physical space, what we understand to be physical space, it would seem that it encompasses a smaller space when at the same time it could be considered infinitely large. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute here. I wanted to make a note and just say that I believe that Einstein was right when he said that space and time was relative. Like everybody knows, I mean, Einstein is obviously a smart guy, but when he, in his theory of relativity, he talked about space and time not being able to separate space time. Now, one thing I didn't agree with a lot of people on was that there is a such thing as time. I mean, I understand, what we understand to be the passing of time is what we understand to be the passing of time. To me, is really not time at all. I understand. Well, to me, time is just more or less a change in position in space, and that's obvious. I run this little mental test with myself. I guess where I question. I say, okay, well, if time existed but there was no movement, would there be any existence in the universe? It's like a thought experiment. And the answer to that question, honestly, is if time is just a flow of some type of, if you want to call it dimension, that doesn't really act on a physical universe, and you took away the change in position in the three dimensions of space, then nothing would exist in the universe. There wouldn't be any bonds to hold atoms together. There wouldn't be any energy of motion. It would be cold. And honestly, according to the new physics, since every material in the universe is based off of a frequency, which is basically a vibration, which is basically a change in position, then there would be no matter. So, and yet time would still, as we think of it, go forward. But if there's nothing to go forward in that time, it's meaningless. So to me, it seems to me that the real dimension is not time, but the actual dimension is the change in position. And that's what is the next creative force in our universe, or that's the next creative medium in our universe. Length, width, height, and change in position in those three physical dimensions. And that's the dimension that Einstein refers to as time. But even Einstein kind of described time in that fashion, that it was sort of like a change in position. It was the dimension of motion, I think is one way he put it. And so the idea, what people commonly think of as time, like 1 or 2 o'clock or something like that, that doesn't make any difference. Time, if you describe it as a sort of change in position or momentum, is a better way to describe time, which kind of negates the idea of going backwards and forwards in time. It sounds silly. Anyway, I just wanted to put that out there to lay a base to go into the higher dimensions and somewhat explain why I said I believe that our brains were basically a fifth dimensional organ. To understand why I say that, you have to understand that the fifth dimension is let's start with the fourth dimension. You have space-time, you have length, width, and height. You got time. Time is simply a point within space to another point within space, and all of the movements that take place within that point, which would look like a sort of worm in space. Then you have the fifth dimension, which is the possibility of any particular point, from any particular point in space to any other particular point in space, or every other actually particular point in space, all of those possibilities. So the fifth dimension, I hope that doesn't sound too silly, but the fifth dimension is basically all of the possibilities that you could get from any one particular point in space, whereas time is the possibility from one particular point to another in space, going through the three dimensions, all three dimensions. That's important though. Time runs